Judge Thomas Lowry, known for his strictness, never imagined his life would rely on Lewis Harper, a war veteran he had denied justice. Forced to fight pain and injustice, Harper's bravery revealed the true meaning of justice and mercy, in a turn of events that shocked everyone. The courtroom buzzed with tension, as if the air itself was charged with electricity. The benches were filled with attorneys, journalists, and onlookers who had come to witness another one of Judge Thomas Lowry's sessions. His stern, unyielding gaze and cold courtroom manner were legendary. His belief in the law was absolute, but often devoid of compassion. Lewis Harper, an older man with streaks of gray in his closely cropped hair, stood before the judge with his back straight, despite the fatigue that showed in his eyes. His dark skin, marked by wrinkles and years of hardship, was a testament to everything he had endured. He wore an old but neatly pressed suit, a symbol of his dignity and unyielding spirit. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for him to speak in his defense. But Lewis remained silent, knowing there was nothing left to say. Judge Lowry adjusted his glasses and glanced at the papers before him as though he hardly needed their contents. He knew what he was about to do, and he could feel the tension in the room build with every passing second. His face remained impassive, and his voice was steady and emotionless. "Based on the evidence presented," he said, suppressing a sigh, "the petition is denied." For a moment, the room was silent. Then a murmur of discontent rippled through the crowd. Some shook their heads, while others cast reproachful glances at the judge. Even Lewis's attorney, a young man with a downcast expression, lowered his eyes, realizing he had done all he could, but it wasn't enough. Lewis didn't flinch. He met the judge's eyes, which held not a flicker of warmth, and gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. In that movement was an acceptance of defeat, but not surrender. He turned to leave, ignoring the sympathetic looks and sighs of disappointment around him. The silence, broken only by the rustle of papers and muted conversations, followed him as he walked to the door. His steps were heavy, yet dignified, the stride of a soldier leaving the battlefield. Beyond those doors lay not freedom, but the need to find another way to reclaim his truth. Judge Lowry watched the veteran's retreating figure with an invisible doubt that flared briefly and vanished from his heart. No one could have known that this man, whom he had just denied clemency, would soon become his only hope in a life-or-death situation. A week had passed since Lewis Harper had left the courtroom with a heavy heart but an unbroken spirit. His days continued in their usual rhythm. Every morning he reported to the local Veterans and Homeless Assistance Center, where he volunteered. Lewis believed that his mission was not only his own redemption, but also helping others who, like him, had been pushed to the margins of society. His kindness and patience were well known. He had a way of listening, finding the right words, and inspiring people to fight their battles. Meanwhile, Judge Thomas Lowry carried on his court sessions with his typical harshness. His reputation as a relentless enforcer of the law sparked murmurs of resentment among colleagues and defendants alike. He often heard people mutter bitterly, "There goes Lowry again, showing no mercy." But Lowry held firm to his beliefs, convinced that justice was more important than feelings. One evening, after a long, exhausting day in court, Lowry headed home. The city was already cloaked in darkness, with streetlights casting uneven glows over roads broken by the occasional car's headlights. His footsteps echoed on the empty sidewalk until he noticed something unusual at the entrance of a bank across the street. At first he thought it was the usual hustle of late customers, but then a shout pierced the night, followed by the crash of breaking glass and a harsh voice issuing commands. Before Lowry could grasp the situation, he was shoved inside. The building, lively with employees and patrons just moments before, fell into an eerie silence, broken only by the voices of armed men issuing orders. There were 3 of them, rough faces, weapons clutched tightly, eyes glistening with determination and tension. They barked at everyone to stay still and silent. Several people sat on the floor, clutching their bags and phones, too scared to even glance at their captors. Lowry tried to remain calm, taking a seat in the corner, his eyes scanning the room for any potential escape. Sweat dripped cold down his temples, but his face remained composed, eyes darting for any opportunity. Then, one of the assailants, A young man with sharp features and a manic glint in his eyes locked eyes with Lowry and smirked. "Hey, look who it is!" he shouted, pointing at Lowry. "It's that judge who locks everyone up! Good old Judge Lowry!" The room froze. People held their breath, sensing that this recognition could change everything, and not for the better. The judge's gaze met the attackers, and there was a flicker of something primal, fear or defiance. Amidst the hostages cowering in fear, Lewis Harper remained almost invisible, hidden behind a couple of chairs against the far wall. His years of service in conflict zones taught him that panic was the worst enemy in such moments. He clenched his jaw, observing the attackers' movements, noting their habits, their weaknesses. The responsibility weighed on him. He couldn't let innocent people be harmed, especially as he took in their terrified faces. Formulating a plan, he slowly turned his head and noticed a young man among the hostages staring at him with pleading eyes. Lewis subtly signaled him to stay calm, closing his eyes for a moment to steady his breathing. He knew that one wrong move or signal could turn the situation catastrophic. Taking advantage of moments when the captors looked away, Lewis started to get the attention of the other hostages with small hand movements, signaling them to remain calm and await his signal. His gestures carried a confidence that gave the others a glimmer of hope. The assailants were tense, eyes darting, fingers gripping their guns so hard their knuckles turned white. One of them, particularly jittery, worried Lewis the most. He knew this man was the most likely to trigger disaster if things went sideways. The moment came. One of the attackers turned to check the street through the window, and Lewis, realizing time was running out, raised his hand in a subtle signal, a hand opening and closing, that police outside would recognize as, "Get ready." Seconds stretched into an eternity. The hostages, unaware of the full plan, followed his example, keeping calm. When one of the criminals moved toward the hostages, barking more orders, Lewis stood up, feigning a stagger to distract him. A second passed, then noise erupted from outside as police began their assault. Chaos ensued. Shouts, clanging weapons, but no hostages were harmed. Lewis stood still, hands visible, ensuring the situation was under control. His eyes met Lowry's, who now looked back with astonishment, and maybe a flicker of realization. The police raid came suddenly, marked by shouts, the pounding of doors, and flashes of light. Lewis Harper, back in battle mode, stayed calm and focused. He watched as armed officers stormed in, assessing the scene and swiftly neutralizing the threat. The attackers barely had time to resist before they were disarmed and forced to the floor. The clatter of chairs, cries, and the noise of the struggle filled the room, then silence. Lewis felt adrenaline still surging but pushed fear aside. He scanned the hostages to ensure everyone was safe. Realizing they were unharmed, he approached Judge Lowry, who sat in stunned silence, his eyes wide and hands trembling. "Come on, we need to get out," Lewis said firmly, helping the judge up by the shoulder. Feeling the veteran's steady grip, Lowry nodded, not fully comprehending who had saved him. Outside, the flashing blue and red lights of police cars lit the night. Hostages emerged one by one, breathing sighs of relief. Lewis guided Lowry to a seat on the curb as medics and officers approached them. The judge looked at Lewis, his eyes reflecting a mix of confusion and gratitude. "Thank you. You saved us all," he whispered, looking into the face of his rescuer. Lewis nodded, replying simply, "Just did what I had to do." As medics checked on the judge, a police officer recognized Lewis from past encounters. A murmur began. "That's the veteran, Lewis Harper." The word spread among the crowd, and realization dawned on Lowry as he processed who had stood before him. His expression shifted, and he looked back up at Lewis, his face marked by a sudden understanding. The next day, the story spread throughout the city. People talked about how Judge Lowry, famous for his uncompromising sternness, had been saved by the veteran he had recently denied clemency. The event became a symbol of second chances and mutual respect. Lowry, once blinded by strict adherence to the letter of the law, began to understand that true justice required compassion and understanding of human complexities. From then on, the story of Lewis Harper and Judge Thomas Lowry became a powerful reminder that justice and mercy must go hand in hand, and that everyone deserves respect and a chance at redemption.